I'm Paige. I'm 35, single, and a chief operating officer for a demanding tech startup. My life is built on predictable metrics and hard deadlines, but my professional competence never seemed to matter when family emotional drama was involved. This year, I didn't just feel ignored. I was explicitly banned from Christmas because my sister decided her heartbreak should cancel everyone else's joy. I had just wrapped a 3-hour board meeting when my phone buzzed. My mother was calling. Her tone was clipped and formal, as if she were reading a legal notice. Paige, she began without the usual warmth. We're keeping Christmas very small this year. It's just going to be your sister and your father and I. She is utterly broken, you know. She needs a quiet, very intimate Christmas with no chaos to disturb her peace. I already knew the reason. My older sister had broken up with her long-term boyfriend. But I had planned a Christmas Day ski trip with friends, a commitment I made months ago. I tried to reason with my mother, explaining I had offered alternatives. I offered to swing by her place on Christmas Eve, Mom, but she said she wanted to be alone. My mother sighed, the sound tight and frustrated. You don't understand. Your sister thinks you're going off with friends while she is struggling is a personal insult. It makes her feel worse, and your father and I agree with her. She said she's miserable because of you. I couldn't believe the level of emotional blackmail. I am responsible because I have a separate life. My mother's voice hardened. I just want to be clear. If you can't prioritize her grief, then you are better off not coming to Christmas this year. We won't have you there. I didn't fight. I didn't beg. I only replied, my voice flat because of me, and hung up immediately. I stood in my apartment staring at the phone. For years I had accepted being the family disappointment. But now I felt a shift. They wanted a battlefield, and for the first time I decided to choose my own weapon. If you've ever had to choose between your personal peace and enabling toxic family behavior, hit the like button and subscribe to see what happened when I decided to stop biting my tongue for good. I nearly dropped the phone onto the slick walnut surface of my executive desk. The sudden silence in my high-rise Boston office was deafening after the call ended. My gut reaction wasn't sadness or anger. It was a cold, hard clarity. I felt zero remorse for my decision to not sacrifice my established plans, a crucial ski trip with friends I had been planning for half a year for my sister's manufactured crisis. My mother Eleanor and father Arthur hadn't called to negotiate. They had called to deliver a verdict using my older sister's emotional volatility as their gavel. The fact that they agreed she was miserable because of me was the final ridiculous confirmation of their lifelong bias. This was their family dynamic. Daria, the sister who was 37 and 2 years my senior, was the designated golden child, the sensitive artist, who needed constant protection from the harsh, cold realities of the world. I was Paige, the CO, the one who pulled herself up by her bootstraps, and who ironically became the family burden because I didn't require their financial or emotional help. I had spent decades being the emotional punching bag for Daria's constant insecurities and demands for attention. If she failed at an art show, it was because the critics were too cruel and unfeeling. If I succeeded, it was always because I was too cold or not artistic enough to understand the depth of her struggles. The Christmas ban wasn't an isolated incident motivated by temporary heartbreak. It was merely Daria's latest and most effective tool to assert control over my life as proof of her own importance within the family structure. This time, the price of that control was simply too high. I decided I was done playing the scapegoat. The sting of rejection still lingered, but it was overshadowed by a fierce determination. I wasn't fighting for a seat at their holiday table. I was fighting for my dignity and for the right to establish a permanent boundary that they could not breach. I wanted to move past the humiliation, but the sheer hypocrisy of the situation demanded a final strategic response. I knew that if I let them win this round, if I canceled my trip and showed up at their house, Daria would simply invent a new crisis next year, and my parents, Eleanor and Arthur, would again happily enforce her demands in the name of peace. The very next day, the escalating drama moved beyond my parents' interference. As I was reviewing Q4 budget projections, a message popped up on my screen, a direct text from Daria. The message wasn't a plea for reconciliation, but a gloating theatrical victory lap designed to twist the knife. "Congrats," it read. "Guess who Mom just invited to Christmas instead of you, Joaquin? Apparently, he's coming because he's a real family friend who actually cares about us. Have fun skiing, but don't worry, we'll tell you how good the prime rib was. Joaquin." The man Daria was allegedly heartbroken over. The man who had been invited to replace me at the most sacred family gathering. This text confirmed two things. First, that the ban was pure malicious theater orchestrated entirely by Daria, and second, that my parents were not just enabling her, they were actively participating in the insult by inviting the very source of her purported devastation. If Joaquin, the supposed cause of her trauma, was now being paraded as a replacement family member, the entire grief narrative was a calculated lie designed solely to punish me for my independence. The stakes instantly shifted. I realized I needed the truth to finally break free. Daria was using her heartbreak as emotional leverage, but leverage only works if the fulcrum is stable. I decided to pull the rug out from under her entire performance. I didn't need that false Christmas. I needed incontrovertible proof that Daria's melodramatic display was manufactured and that her actions were rooted in deeper, more dangerous manipulation. My fingers immediately went to my contacts list, not to call my parents back and express my outrage, but to reach out to the only person who truly knew the hidden truth about Daria's breakup and the actual contents of her heart, Joaquin. I knew I couldn't just let the Christmas ban stand as an act of petty emotional theater. My anger needed a precise target, but before taking action, I absolutely needed to confirm the truth to frame my counterattack. My first call was to my best friend Nate, a sharp corporate lawyer I'd known since college. I didn't want him to represent me. I wasn't ready for a formal lawsuit, but I needed an objective legal perspective on what Daria and my parents had done. Nate listened, his voice turning cautious. "Paige, you need to detach. Your sister's behavior is emotionally abusive, but your parents, Arthur and Eleanor, are merely enabling her. You have to decide if getting the truth is worth burning the whole bridge down." I told him the bridge was already burning. I just need to know if Daria's heartbreak is real grief or a strategic bankruptcy, Nate. He stressed the necessity of keeping the emotional stakes out of any future legal action, reminding me that documented facts are the only things that matter in court. I assured him that facts were precisely what I was after. I reached out to Joaquin, Daria's ex-boyfriend, and arranged to meet him at a quiet, neutral coffee shop halfway between Boston and New York, far from any familiar family haunts. I felt no awkwardness, only a professional need for concrete information. When he walked in, I was immediately struck by the difference between Daria's portrayal and reality. He didn't look heartbroken or defeated. He looked exhausted and stressed, wearing the tired expression of someone who had recently escaped a psychological siege. After 30 minutes of careful small talk, I cut to the chase, explaining my family's Christmas ban, framing it as Daria using their breakup to manipulate me. Joaquin sighed, placing his mug down with a clatter that sounded too loud in the quiet establishment. "Daria wasn't heartbroken, Paige," he confirmed, his voice low and firm. "She was terrified. She was terrified because I found out the real reason she wanted to marry me wasn't love. It was damage control." He then revealed the truth was purely transactional and financially destructive. Daria had systematically been abusing my corporate American Express card, the one I had added her as an authorized user to several years ago for emergencies, when she was setting up her art studio for extravagant personal spending completely unrelated to her business. But the final straw came when she attempted to push him to co-sign a huge private loan for $80,000 to fund an incredibly risky, highly speculative art installation that had zero chance of generating revenue. When he refused to back her financially, citing her reckless spending, she manufactured the breakup and the subsequent emotional meltdown to deflect blame onto him. The heartbreak narrative was Daria's desperate attempt to keep the family on her side, while she figured out how to pay back the credit card and the loan money she had already spent. Joaquin explained, his eyes focused on the table. The manipulation went deeper than money, reaching into the realm of reputation. He told me Daria had secretly been taking pictures of him with female colleagues during business trips, then selectively cropping and sending those photos to my parents, Arthur and Eleanor, implying infidelity and reckless behavior to preemptively discredit him before the truth about the money came out. This was precisely how she had secured his spot at their Christmas table, by making him look like the worst villain. He reached under the table and pulled out a thick, heavy manila envelope. "I'm pursuing a civil lawsuit, Paige. This folder contains all the evidence, emails detailing the loan demand, bank statements proving the misuse of funds, and those defaming cropped photos she sent to your parents." He slid the heavy envelope across the table. "I don't want to fight your family, but she destroyed my reputation and my finances to cover her tracks. Maybe you should know who you're really up against." The weight of that envelope felt like a promise of irreversible change. 2 days later, I drove my SUV down the long, winding drive to my parents' colonial house in Connecticut. I wasn't going there to beg for an invitation, but to publicly announce the truth that they had so eagerly covered up with emotional theatrics. The house was decorated of coarse lights glittering and oversized wreaths adorning every window, a perfect glossy facade for the rot inside. I walked in without knocking. My mother Eleanor looked up from arranging a centerpiece, her face instantly turning sour. My father Arthur stood by the fireplace looking uncomfortable, while Daria was dramatically sprawled on the couch, wrapped in an expensive cashmere throw, clutching a book she clearly wasn't reading, the perfect picture of the heartbroken victim. I bypassed the greetings entirely. I walked directly to the mahogany coffee table, placed the heavy manila folder filled with Joaquin's evidence down, and let the sheer weight of the documents silence the room. "I'm not here for Christmas," I stated, my voice cutting through the manufactured quiet. "I'm here because I know the real reason Daria banned me. It wasn't heartbreak over Joaquin. It was panic over $80,000 and a financial lawsuit he's filing against her." Daria shot upright, the cashmere throw slipping to the floor. "What are you talking about? You're lying," she spat, but her eyes flickered nervously toward the folder. I didn't acknowledge her. I opened the folder, pulling out the bank statements proving the misuse of Joaquin's corporate card, and placed them neatly beside the beautifully wrapped gift boxes. "These are statements proving Daria misused corporate funds for personal purchases. And these," I continued, placing the heavily marked emails detailing her aggressive loan demand on top, "prove the breakup happened because he refused to fund her reckless art project. And finally, these are the cropped photos she sent you, mother, fabricating infidelity to ruin his reputation and secure his spot at your Christmas table." My parents' faces drained of color. My father Arthur finally stepped forward, placing his hand protectively on Daria's shoulder. "Paige, you need to stop this," he pleaded, his voice trembling not with shock, but with concern for the public scandal. "This is inappropriate. You are ruining the holiday. We will handle Daria's financial issues privately. You are embarrassing yourself." He tried to dismiss the evidence, reaching for the folder, but I pulled it away instantly. "You have been handling it privately," I countered, "by banning me and enabling her to continue lying and destroying people's lives. You know she's a manipulator, yet you choose the easy path of sacrificing me." Daria realized her entire victim performance had collapsed, and she completely snapped. The mask of fragile sorrow dropped, revealing a ferocious, calculating malice. She screamed, her voice echoing in the grand living room. "You think you're so smart, don't you, Paige? The successful, untouchable COO. You think you're above the rest of us with your big house and your big bank account. You're not." She took 2 quick steps, pointing a furious finger at me. And then, she unleashed the unforgivable act. "I saw the report, Paige. Remember when I visited your apartment a few months ago? I was bored, and I found your old work tablet. That massive data breach at your startup last quarter. The one you covered up with your board, I know it was you. You screwed up the compliance on the European servers, and you paid millions to silence the media. If I tell the press that the COO Paige was responsible, you won't have a job, let alone a Christmas." She stood there breathing heavily, her eyes gleaming with triumphant hatred. She didn't reveal this to hurt Joaquin. She revealed it to annihilate me. The room fell silent as if a physical blow had landed. The air was thick and metallic, not with the smell of holiday spices, but with the cold shock of malice. Daria's revelation about the startup data breach, my confidential compliance error that could obliterate my career, was calculated and lethal. It wasn't a spontaneous outburst. It was a preemptive strike against my last source of stability, a demonstration that she would burn my life down just to win the argument. My parents, Eleanor and Arthur, didn't look at Daria with horror. They looked at me with sheer terror. Not because Daria had committed an atrocious act of betrayal, but because my career, their prized asset, was now endangered. Eleanor rushed to Daria not to chastise her, but to physically quiet her whispering fiercely about discretion. Arthur, his face sickly pale, focused entirely on the crisis Daria had created for me. "Paige," he said, stepping toward me with forced calm, "this is business. This is professional. This stays right here. You must promise me you won't escalate this. This is Christmas, for God's sake. We need to focus on what matters, your job. You need to keep quiet about Daria, and we'll deal with this mess later." Their reaction confirmed everything. Their loyalty was not to Justice Truth, or even my physical safety from financial ruin, but to minimizing inconvenience and maintaining the family facade. They would always prioritize the toxic peace over the truth. I realized I was fighting 2 battles, one against Daria's manipulation and one against my parents' fundamental refusal to acknowledge reality. I looked at the 3 of them, Daria smug and breathing heavily after her attack, and my parents desperate to sweep the detonation under the rug. I knew, without any doubt, that I was done. The relationship wasn't just broken, it was toxic beyond repair. I slowly gathered the documents from the coffee table, carefully tucking Joaquin's evidence back into the manila folder, the silence of my meticulous actions dominating Daria's fading sobs. I looked at the glowing fireplace, the expensive decorations, and the perfect holiday setting I was now being permanently excluded from, and felt only profound emptiness. "There is no we anymore." I stated, my voice dangerously soft, carrying more finality than any scream. "There is no later where you 2 will suddenly grow a backbone and choose what's right." I stood up, adjusting my professional blazer, regaining the composure I needed to deliver the definitive closure. I had spent my entire adult life trying to earn their respect and love by being the stable one, the successful one. Now I accepted that the cost of that love was my soul. I looked directly at Eleanor and Arthur and delivered the ultimate declaration of psychological and social severance. I changed the language of our relationship forever. I did not call them mom or dad. You 2, I addressed them, meeting their fearful eyes. You chose the manipulator. Effective immediately, I am no longer your child. You can keep the Christmas, the drama, and the fake intimacy. I will keep my peace. And I will keep the information Daria just revealed. But know this, if either of you or Daria ever try to contact me, spread another lie, or interfere with my professional life again, I will release all the evidence against Daria to the public domain and pursue every single civil and professional recourse available to me. Consider this relationship permanently terminated. I let the cold, formal address, the removal of the familial titles, hang in the air like a final, irreversible death sentence for the relationship. I turned and walked toward the front door, leaving the suffocating heat of their living room for the cold, honest air outside. The following days after Christmas, after the absolute, undeniable severance, were marked by a profound, cold silence. No calls were placed, no texts were sent. The no-contact boundary I established was absolute, and though the emptiness was painful, it was the only antidote to the decades of toxic drama they had inflicted. I did not spend the holiday skiing. Instead, I immediately went into damage control mode regarding the sensitive information Daria had exposed. My first call was back to Nate, my lawyer friend. I outlined Daria's threat, the exact details of the data breach she had overheard, and the vulnerability it presented. Nate was grim. This was no longer a family dispute, but a serious threat of corporate espionage or defamation that could result in my professional ruin. He immediately drew up a formal cease and desist letter explicitly clarifying that any attempt by Daria Eleanor or Arthur to contact me or disclose any private or professional information would result in immediate legal action and the public disclosure of all evidence concerning Daria's financial fraud. I sent the letter to my parents' residence via certified mail, ensuring they understood that my decision to go no contact was now legally reinforced. This professional clarity was the only language Arthur, my father, truly respected. The letter was a necessary shield. Within a few days, the reality of the situation began to set in for my family. Joaquin, having been publicly maligned by Daria and realizing her family was actively supporting her fraud, filed the civil lawsuit against her for the misuse of his corporate funds, seeking not just the full repayment of the large sum, but additional punitive damages. This was the hammer blow. Daria, the so-called sensitive artist, was suddenly facing a significant legal liability that she could not paint away. More crucially, my parents Arthur and Eleanor realized the true depth of their trouble. Arthur had foolishly co-signed a previous business line of credit for Daria, convinced by her dramatic pleas of being an underappreciated genius. The lawsuit triggered a review of her financial standing, which instantly placed the onus for her earlier, smaller financial missteps squarely onto my parents' shoulders. Their desire to keep the holiday small had just resulted in a financial disaster that was far from intimate. The social consequences followed swiftly. Arthur and Eleanor, deeply embedded in a high society Connecticut community where reputation was paramount, began receiving awkward phone calls. Joaquin, having been invited to their Christmas, had quietly mentioned to a mutual family friend that Daria was being sued for financial fraud. The lie about his infidelity was instantly dismantled. Suddenly, the extended family, the aunts, uncles, and cousins who had long tolerated Daria's theatrics but respected Paige's success, began reaching out to me, asking leading questions about Daria's latest troubles. The golden child was now being publicly questioned, and the silence I maintained was far more damning than any accusation I could have made. The morning after Christmas Day, the calm I had found was violently shattered. I was sitting in my living room preparing my final notes for the legal firm I was hiring to review my own compliance exposure when the doorbell began to ring insistently, not a polite chime, but a desperate, furious drumming that shook the glass. Then came the frantic banging, accompanied by the muffled wailing sound of my mother Eleanor completely losing control. I approached the door cautiously. Through the peephole, I saw the three of them. Arthur's face was ashen and frantic. Eleanor was sobbing uncontrollably, and Daria was standing there shaking with a mix of fear and indignation. I opened the door just enough to see them. Arthur started yelling immediately about the lawsuit and the co-signed loan, demanding I fix it by talking to Joaquin. Eleanor pushed forward, pleading, "Please, honey, we need your help. We're ruined." Daria looked past them, catching sight of the manila folder I instinctively held in my hand, the one filled with Joaquin's evidence I'd been referencing. Her eyes went wide, the color draining from her face as she finally grasped the depth of my strategic betrayal. Her theatrical facade completely crumbled, and she stammered, her voice thick with genuine terror for the first time. "Wait. Why do you have his photos?" I did not have to say a word. Daria's question, her final desperate gasp of fear, was answered by the cold, decisive click as I closed the door on the three of them. The silence that followed the heavy slam was immediate and absolute, a physical cleansing of the chaotic energy they had dragged into my apartment. The frantic banging and Mother Eleanor's pleading gradually faded into the dull sound of a distant car driving away. The frenzy was over. All that remained was the quiet, hard-won peace I had struggled to achieve for decades. I walked back into my living room, the manila folder with Joaquin's evidence still in my hand. There was no temptation to open the door, no flicker of doubt about my decision. Their panic confirmed my power. My no-contact boundary was not an emotional act of spite. It was a non-negotiable term of self-preservation. I spent the remainder of the holiday weekend finalizing the legal strategy with Nate to protect myself from Daria's corporate threat. I had lost the traditional family Christmas, but I had gained something infinitely more valuable: the full and unblinking acknowledgement that my sister was not merely troubled, but actively and maliciously toxic, and my parents were her willing accomplices. The following months brought the tangible, real-world consequences of their choices. Daria's collapse was swift and financial. She had no defense against Joaquin's lawsuit. His documentation was meticulous. She was forced to settle, not only paying back the $80,000 and the punitive fees, but also incurring substantial legal costs, which wiped out the modest trust fund my grandparents had established for her. The financial support she always relied on from Arthur and Eleanor evaporated as they were forced to divert their own assets to cover their co-signed obligations triggered by the settlement. Arthur and Eleanor were not financially ruined, but they were deeply damaged. To cover Daria's debts and mounting legal fees, and to avoid public foreclosure, they were compelled to quietly sell the beloved colonial house in Connecticut, the house they had decorated so lavishly and the setting for all their manufactured holiday joy. They moved to a smaller, far less prestigious condo, and the social standing they valued so highly crumbled. They became the subject of hushed rumors within their affluent social circle, the parents who had indulged their artistic daughter to the point of financial and social embarrassment. They lost the facade, and that for them was the ultimate punishment. My own Christmas a year later was exactly the peaceful event I had planned for. I was on the ski trip with Nate and a small group of friends in Vermont. The air was crisp, the snow was fresh, and the conversations were light, genuine, and free of emotional traps. There was no anxiety about who was being favored, no fear of sudden manipulation, and absolutely no phone calls. I had accepted the profound surgical loss of my family of origin, and in doing so, I had secured my own happiness and professional stability. The feeling wasn't triumph, it was quiet, profound self-respect. The most valuable lesson I learned that year was the difference between familial obligation and personal integrity. They always told me Christmas was about family, but I realized the word family doesn't magically strip away the toxicity. If your family becomes the primary source of malice, manipulation, and professional threat, then the painful, difficult act of estrangement is not an act of cruelty or spite. It is the necessary ultimate act of self-preservation. I had been banned from one Christmas because I refused to play the victim to my sister's emotional tyranny. But by choosing my own path, I didn't just win the argument, I reclaimed my entire life. And that quiet, honest peace is the most precious gift I have ever received.